Southwest Fire Academy was established in 2015 as a response to the recognized need for quality, safe, and affordable fire and rescue training in Ontario. This is not your average fire college. SFA has high standards for their students, and it is their mission to teach and produce qualified, ambitious firefighters who are prepared to work hard to serve their communities. This is not a diploma mill. This is where you can learn strategic, aggressive firefighting from passionate, intelligent instructors who never forget why they were made to do this job. SFA is an accredited private career college that is regulated by the Ministry of Training, colleges, and universities, with a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Fire Marshal. This means that SFA is an approved training provider with the OFM, and the programs are recognized in Ontario. Check out their pre-service and expanding selection of course offerings at southwestfireacademy.ca. Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 114 of Multiple Calls. I'm Scott Hewlett. You may have heard me say, don't let anyone steal a day of your career, but perhaps you hadn't considered that it could include you. Regardless of how many years you choose to stay in, to give yourself the highest probability of enjoying that time overall, you need to take care of yourself. Beyond being the most effective, the healthiest version of you is the most aware, the most compassionate, and the most fulfilling to be with. There are no downsides. Unlike the high school peer pressure to do otherwise, there's letting yourself live a little, but there's also giving yourself the best chance of living a lot. Here's my chat with Amanda Harry.
Hey, Scott.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. How you been?
Busy. I'm in a bit of a time warp right now. I've got two little guys, so we're nearing the end of school and it gets a little hairy around here.
Well, thanks for making the time.
Yeah, this is a treat.
I'm excited to get into it. The points you offered were great, so we can roll through those. And it was great that you gave the Connected Warrior a listen to, so you can always give your insight and feelings on that.
Yeah.
Just kick things off by telling me about the work you do, and you messaged about talking about the motivation for your work and your personal experience of helping professionals that are being unsupported.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixture of my own experience and then seeing the experience of those that are close to me. Been a social worker for a couple decades now. And in my early 20s, I moved to London, England to have a little change of scenery and have some adventure. And I ended up working in frontline child protection work there. And when I was there was a lot of exposure to gang activity. I worked directly with young people who are in gangs, a lot of really serious substance use and addictions going on in their families. So just really heavy stuff that I was seeing and being exposed to. And I found myself with what I would now identify with all the knowledge and skills and experience that I have as post-traumatic stress. And, was having intrusive thoughts and nightmares and a lot of anxiety around going to work, a lot of fear about seeing some of the clients that I was working with at the time that was really high risk situations. And I had to kind of get myself out of the situation. It was very much kind of normalized in the environment, the kind of hours that I was working and what I was experiencing was like, well, you just kind of carry on. Or, this is why it's time limited. You only do a couple of years, then you get out because you can't handle this essentially. So I had that experience. I recovered on my own by taking some time off and pursuing my yoga teacher training in India and just getting away from it all and learning a lot of really useful skills, diving really deep into meditation, mindfulness, yoga, my yoga practice there, and came back and felt pretty clear I needed to leave. I needed to change jobs. And from there, I got into more training and development roles where I was responsible for working with multi-agency partnerships around child protection. So that was my first kind of professional relationship building with police, with fire, with other first responder agencies. And when I was working at that level, I saw kind of the same thing that I was experiencing, that, these professionals are dealing with these really challenging issues, but not getting any support. So there was a real kind of layer of that kind of coming up for me, and just an awareness of, as a helping professional with all of these skills to help others, I was never formally taught how to help myself. And then seeing that in my colleagues who were first responders, that they had similar experiences of being out there helping the community who are in really difficult situations, but never given the skills or tools to help themselves. So years on, I carried on. I moved back. I had my babies, moved back to Canada, and decided to expand my skills further and open my own private practice. As I was doing some trauma training, I was doing my EMDR certification at that time. I was chatting with my sister, who was a volunteer firefighter here locally. And I was talking to her about the training I was doing. And at that time, she had officially retired because she had her babies and couldn't figure out how to parent and do the volunteer stuff and work and all of that life stuff at the same time. And she shared with me some of her experiences that she had and talked about how at that time they had been coping by having some beers or other beverages back at the hall. You just have some drinks and you go home and you carry on with it. You don't talk about it. And she shared with me some of the symptoms that were coming up for her, particularly after she left, and some of the calls that were sticking with her. So I was reflecting on, my own experiences and my own frustrations of being a helping professional and not knowing what to expect and kind of help myself. And then this kind of awareness that my sister had experienced this in her role as a volunteer firefighter. And I started feeling pretty angry. And that's always a good place for me. If I get angry, if I get a bit pissed off about something, it means I've got to take action. So we were in the middle of COVID, and I reached out to the local fire chief here in the community that I'd grown up in, and then, more recently had moved back to, and just introduced myself and said, hey, essentially, have a real interest in this. I was working with some first responder clients at that time, and I was just curious about what he was doing and around mental health and if they needed any support. I shared at that time that, I have a real passion for volunteering and I have a real belief around spending my time giving back to the community. I didn't want to be a volunteer firefighter because I need sleep, but I would like to do something. So he extended the opportunity straight away to come in and chat. And that was really the start of the work that I've been doing. He was super open about where they were at. He spent a lot of time talking about the then requirement and current requirement to have a PTSD prevention plan in place. But, at that time, his was just a good old copy and paste job from another department who'd probably copied and pasted it as well from a template. And they did kind of annual tick box training, and they had a peer support team, but wasn't really active. They had a CISM team that hadn't been active for a long time and was due another round of training. And that was kind of where they were at. So for me, it was a great opportunity to start to build my understanding about the kind of structural framework around mental health in local fire departments. Well, I guess pretty much across the board fire departments, as I've come to learn, and start to understand what challenges they face around mental health and what supports that they might be interested in.
And how important did you realize that the relationship building came into play and building trust within that community?
Huge. I'm so grateful to Fire Chief Morgan Alcock. He was super open to essentially developing the relationship and spending time with me. It probably hit at a good time, given it was COVID. He had a bit of space for a project, but he was so open to sharing what he knew and really just putting in the time with me, which meant that we could develop some rapport, build some trust, and see it as a bit of a joint project. If I didn't have that relationship with him, then there's no way I would have had the opportunity to do this work. The relationship started before I even reached out. I'd met him and his two then young kids. When I'd take my boys to the library, they'd be at the fire station with the trucks out, washing the trucks or sitting in the trucks, and he would take time to chat with my boys. And, I saw him as really open and welcoming, and it just made it easier to develop that relationship and build this work together.
What was the initial uptake from the crews, and did it take a while for them to warm up?
This was very much a work in progress. I think I would say it took a good year to develop and then roll out. There was quite a few steps that I took to kind of develop an understanding of what might be helpful here. I was really learning as I was going along. And I think, Chief Alcock was as well. And we were trying to kind of figure out what's working, what's not working. So I did a good scope of what the offering was, both in Canada, what are some of the larger departments doing that have some healthy funding, and what was being done internationally. And then trying to kind of pick Chief Alcock's brain about like, so how could this work locally in a small volunteer department that doesn't have funding for this, that doesn't have something like this in place already? So it was quite a big development phase. What we agreed to do then was to bring on board the peer support team and the health and safety committee at that time, bring them together. So we had a cohort of more senior officers to share with them what we were thinking, what we've learned, and help them help us create the pathway and what turned into a mental health and wellness action plan rather than a policy. What we did was brought them together and shared our drafts. A big part of the policy was doing proactive screenings as well as reactive screenings after critical incidents. So we spent a lot of time developing what are the questions we're going to ask? How would you like us to share this with you? How would you like us to ask you the questions? What questions do you want us to ask? What follow-up do you want? So they were very helpful in inputting and developing this program right from the start. I think without that, again, we wouldn't have had the take up. I think we needed to really like get that engagement and buy-in early on. So they felt ownership so that it was really theirs.
I'm aware of some departments that have siloed their teams in that way, where there's a peer support team and there's a CISM team, and then there's a health and wellness team, which is more focusing on physical fitness and nutrition and such. I'm sure each of these groups can still do great work, but do you see there being a benefit of bringing all together as one team and still doing their individual work, but being seen, on the front end as a unified group?
Definitely. In another department that I'm working with, it's a bigger department. It's a composite department. So there's more resources, more people, more groups. They've done this and they meet on a quarterly basis and bring everyone together. And I think what's really important there is really developing a learning culture and a learning organization where the more senior officers who have an interest and a passion for this are coming together and sharing like, what are some of the key themes? How are we dealing with these particular situations so that the learning is shared and that there's a consistent approach and also a place for people to go for support so that people aren't working in those silos. And then they can go out and do their roles where they carry particular expertise. But I think that coming back together is a really important part of building the culture around health and wellness, around mental health, around physical health and fitness. It's just a really good part of building the relationships.
Something really interesting that you shared in your write-up to me was the myth of PTSD prevention. So I would love for you to talk about that.
Well, one of the things that was shocking to me as a clinician kind of coming in and seeing the requirement for a PTSD prevention plan was that it was like, oh, they think that we're going to prevent PTSD, that in some ways that it's not normal to have these responses to the shit that we're seeing day in and day out and trying to just kind of compartmentalize and carry on, that it's not going to come up for us. So I was really kind of curious about that. And that it was like individual basis that they had to do these things that were in the policy so they didn't get PTSD, rather than kind of normalizing that everyone's going to respond to this work in different ways. And everyone has different kind of tools and resources available to them to kind of cope and deal with the stuff that they see, and normalize that some days are going to be hard. Some stuff is going to hit us heavy. Some things aren't going to hit us heavy. And we have to have, a good array of supports and resources to help us as helping professionals, do this job and still be a human.
Not that I need you to speak for the entire counseling or psychotherapy industry, but what is your take on the current view of PTSD and recovery? There's a lot of great work being done around psychedelics like MDMA and psilocybin, ketamine. What's your view on how that's going? How is the industry seeing it now?
Assisted therapies aren't my current area of expertise. However, I think the research is really clear that it's such a great tool. Some of the psychedelic assisted therapies are such a great, gateway in an ironic way to help people kind of develop the opportunity to connect with some of the things that they may have been compartmentalizing and holding back. I believe that there's a risk, and I've seen this with some clients that are like, maybe I'll just go do shrooms and I'll feel better. And so I think there's a risk that people see it as this is the only way. I'm going to, go use the plant medicine, or I'm going to go use the psychedelic assisted therapy and I'll be healed, rather than also recognizing that, you may have some more awareness come up for you, but then you still have to do something with that. It's really about balance and knowing that this is a great resource, is a great tool. And there's other therapies or supports or resources that will benefit from tapping into at the same time, or in parallel, or as a follow-up to an experience with some of the psychedelic assisted therapies. I don't think that it can be used in isolation.
Really, the guidance and the integration pieces are what help it have the most benefit.
Definitely. I think it's a great way to open the pathway and then identify what further work needs to be done. I'm a big believer that if we weren't ready, if our brain wasn't prepared for us to do the work, it wouldn't open the door anyways. So I think it's just kind of like a tool or a resource that people use when they're already feeling ready to kind of explore.
This is kind of ironic that departments really do embrace fire prevention, fire-related safety education. It's 2 of the 3 points. And even with brand new rookies coming on, they want them to have some aspect of that to get on the job. Yet, do you find the difficulty still exists to getting funding for this proactive approach for mental health? Is that reactive nature of emergency service work still more powerful influence when seeing how we should approach problems as opposed to the front end?
Definitely. And I think there's also a real kind of nuance that we need to consider in terms of the career departments who have really healthy, helpful benefit packages and insurance coverage versus some of my closer to home departments and the majority of the departments across Canada who are volunteer or composite departments, where that funding isn't available. So I love working with my clients who have open-ended or very healthy benefits because they're up for doing the preventative work. And then they call again when shit happens, but they're kind of in it for the long haul. And we are not having to kind of navigate like, okay, you only have funding for 3 sessions. How are we going to deal with this presenting issue when I know very well that there's going to be underlying issues that people are going to want to address as well as we start to kind of open the boxes. So for career departments where there's healthy benefit packages, then there's kind of no issue. They can access services and support. They can be really proactive. I've had a real change in culture over the last couple of years of new rookies getting on departments saying like, hey, my captain said I need to reach out and find a therapist to just have someone support me through my journey. And, I'm doing my happy dance over here saying like, this is amazing. This is exactly what we want, people to already have the relationships, break down the barriers of having those first conversations, making sure they've got someone that's a good fit so that they can do that proactive work of understanding like, what are you bringing in with you? How are you feeling now that you're kind of settling in with the people, the personality, the policies? And as you start to kind of attend to the first calls and you're going through that learning phase of how do I deal with this? How am I responding to this? I can do that work with them. And then if other stuff is piling up or coming up, then we can address it as it comes up. So that's the best scenario. The challenges that I'm having as a mental health clinician who is really passionate about supporting her local departments, where I'm in a rural area, there's more kind of stigma and challenges around accessing services because we're rural and there's not as many services available and the funding isn't available. They have access to mandatory EAP packages, which people have shared aren't meeting their needs. They're too short term. They're not specialist enough and they don't get a warm welcome when they access them. And then they don't have benefits for a private therapist like myself who specializes and is really passionate in this area. So their traditional only access to services when shit really goes wrong and they meet the criteria for PTSD and they can put in a claim.
It's been nice to see a change in the benefit packages where before you were limited to only having coverage with counselors that or psychotherapists that were working for the EFAP every 3 years, whatever group, whatever company you went with. And then if they change companies and your therapist still works for the other company, then you'd have to change therapists. So that continuity is not there. Now, a lot of them are opening up to you can see who you want as long as they're registered. That's definitely a benefit.
Goodness of fit is so important. People being able to choose is really important too. They want to go to the person that their friend or doctor or chief said is good. and they want to feel like they're choosing and they're going to get the best service. They've already kind of like done that work of being hopeful and having a sense like this can help rather than just calling up a number and getting what they get. I think that element of personal choice is so important.
In an ideal world, what is the best time to find someone that's good and is a fit for you?
Before you start the work. Before you start the work. Think about my own journey, my training as a social worker. All of the work that we had to do and learning the theories and understanding the approaches, we had to do it on ourselves, examine ourselves, look at our own history, look at what's coming up for us. How does the theory apply to our situation where we grew up? So really developing that kind of deep understanding of ourselves and what we're bringing into this, how we manage stress and stressful situations, what resources and tools we have access to, what our community and support and who our people are that we can go to, and where the gaps are. I think that's so important because once we start adding the layers of stress and pressure, good stress, good pressure of getting the job that you wanted and trying to fit in with the crew and learning all of these new skills, our capacity gets reduced and it's harder to develop those relationships. We don't have as much time. So ideally, everyone would do it early. Everyone would engage in this work.
Are you aware of any data if family members are accessing at the same rate as the employees, or are they aware of it?
Locally, it's great that I keep track of any time someone reaches out. So I have a real mix of 60% of the department reaching out and then family and friends also reaching out for supports themselves. This is a newer area of service provision, and we're just starting to shine the light on it because practitioners like myself have seen for years how neglected families are of first responders. When I was talking to the mental health and wellness group here in Waynfleet, when we were starting to roll out the quarterly proactive screening as well as a reactive post-critical incident screenings. The big joke was like, don't send it to me, just send it to my wife or my husband or my partner, because they're the ones that are going to be able to tell if I'm being a jerk or not. They're the ones that are going to be able to tell if my mood's changed because they're more tuned into it than I am. So there's this real awareness that actually our families are our safe place where we kind of let all of the armor off and we come home with whatever is going on and they have to deal with us. This work can impact families. And I think families need to have some really good superpowers and resources to support each other and understand the impact of shift work and sleep schedules and trauma exposure, understand the impact that it has not only on the individual, but on the relationship, on the kids. I think we just need to have that awareness and support families to have those skills.
Are you noticing a trend that the first responders are coming to the realization or acceptance that doing this kind of work actually makes you better at the job and a better person off the job? That it doesn't have to be this binary choice of, a complete mess on the floor and a stoic statue, that there's a balance in between, there's ratios.
I think that sense of balance is the most important piece there. And what I'm really amazed at is seeing how open people are to doing this work and how deeply vulnerable they are willing to be. So often what I get is somebody saying, oh, I've had a bit of a shitty call, or, I want to do just some preventative work to make sure I don't get too fucked up. And then they'll come in and once they start opening the boxes, they'll realize, oh, actually, this is also presenting in my marriage. I'm having to close off to manage calls. And it means that I'm showing up as more closed off at home. Or if things are really stressful at home, if any of the things that's going on at home, that makes them more kind of hypervigilant or more kind of challenged at work as well. So there's more of an awareness of how one can impact the other and vice versa.
Have you had any dialogue with clients about bringing the softness to calls in the moments where it's beneficial for the person and for them?
Lovely. So you're talking about that patient experience and how you can use yourself or how first responders show up for people, not just physically doing the stuff, but how they're being. And this is one of my favorite topics of conversation because it tends to be such an aha moment for the clients that I work with. My firefighters in particular are such amazing doers, they're such huge problem solvers. And this is another thing where it can kind of cause them challenges in relationships because they're like, right, I want to solve the problem. What's the problem? Rather than being able to kind of just hold space for whatever emotions might be present. And I think this is such an important skill to have and be tuned into when we're working with people who are having their worst day, that actually it's not just about showing up and fixing the problem, but there's so much value in how you can be present with somebody. And you spoke about this in the episode that you released recently, and it really stood out for me. One of the things that often comes up when a call goes sideways or when someone passes where the firefighter couldn't solve the problem, I'm doing my bunny ears quotes here, then they feel like they failed. And one of the things that I really like to kind of understand is, well, that's what you couldn't do in that situation. But what about how you were able to be in that situation? How did you show up in that situation while that person was passing? What may it have meant that you were there and that you actually cared, or that you're here having this conversation, caring about that individual now? What did that mean? And that leads to a lot of deeper questions about purpose and meaning that are so beautiful to explore and help people really be in touch with. And I think when we're in touch with that sense of purpose and meaning and who we are as humans and how we can make a difference just through our humanness, that can bring a greater sense of value to the work that we do, as well as a greater sense of confidence that, okay, even if I don't have the solution or I can't fix this problem, I can just be here with you and let you know that I'm here, that I'm with you, that you're not alone. And that's different if I didn't show up today. That's different if they got the guy that's just pissed off and he's throwing hose around.
There was nothing we could do is sometimes just not knowing what it was you could have done, that you just haven't been made aware or given the tools, or maybe even given permission by other firefighters or first responders or by yourself, that you can bring that into the work that you do. And it's possibly one of the most impactful things you can do for people that their families at least will remember. And if you want to take it to another level energetically, that being there with that person as they pass, that incredible privilege that is, and then walk away with a good feeling that you made that shitty situation so much better, even just by your energy.
That really touches on the privilege of the work that I get to do in supporting people to look at that and touch in with that. It's in some ways a bit counterintuitive or counterculture in some ways, where we've got to this place where there was a lot of disconnect and do the job and don't think of the person as a person. They're a patient, just do the tasks that you're doing. And then now we're saying like, actually, there's great value in connecting and being human and showing up. So I think it's hard for people to think about like, what would that balance be until they're in that place where they feel like they can use themselves as a resource, as another human who can have presence and who can connect. And you talk about energetically, just be with somebody so they know that they're not alone. And when we talk about when's a good time to do this kind of work, or for people to make sure that they're well-resourced and they're kind of reviewing what they have in their backpacks before they even start, I think that's so important. You have to be in quite a sturdy place to be able to be present rather than zone out. Zoning out is such an important stress response. And actually, in situations like that, it might be great value in tuning in rather than zoning out. So we need to be resourced enough ourselves to be in a place where we can do that.
There's a lot of talk and focus about leadership and culture, and very often it's finger pointing and expectations of what administration should be doing. There is a shift in general, even when it comes to fire, but mostly when it comes to firefighting skills and tasks, about leading from where you're at or the water boiling from the bottom. So there is a shift when it comes to fireground work of people leading by example, being proud of the work they do, being engaged, loving the job, is what we really need to shift the culture in this regard too, to have those people that other people admire and want to emulate, to show that you can do both, that they can crush it when it comes to the actual physical skills and you don't have to make a choice on one or the other. Is that what we really need to shift the culture?
Super biased and super convinced here that that's vital. And when we talk about leadership, it's not necessarily the person that wears the white hat. It's not necessarily the chief, but this is about everyone kind of taking personal responsibility here. And when we do have administration, when we do have the traditional leadership, like the chiefs, like the captains, like the lieutenants showing up and sharing their own mental health journeys, their own experiences, their own challenges and how they've overcome it, sharing that like, yeah, I've been working with a therapist for years. This is how I deal with stuff. Then it means that it's giving everyone else permission to talk about it and that it's normalized. One of the biggest compliments that I got around the work that I'm doing in my community here was the fire chief saying he knew that there was a shift when he went to someone's garage after a fire to have a beverage, and everyone was sitting around and they were all talking about like when they last saw their therapist. He was like, yes, like this is the sign. So there was a sense of him normalizing it because he'll co-facilitate training. He's been at all of the meetings. He's led the rollout of this program, and he follows up with people around their engagement in the program. So there's a clear expectation of this is just how we're going to do things here, as well as from the ground up of others sharing how they're taking care of themselves, sharing the work that they do so that they can show up in their own lives and as professionals in the fire.
The term influencer is super latent and eye-roll worthy now because of social media, but really there are people within any culture that have influence. So I feel like it's incumbent on them to recognize that they do have influence. They could be super humble people and just not want to see themselves that way, but you talk about taking personal responsibility and accountability. It could be just if you recognize that you have influence. This is the whole with great power comes great responsibility, right? That's, a cheesy Marvel quote, but it's pretty on point that if these people recognize that they have influence, they could choose to do some great things with it, that they don't need to change SOGs and tactics books. You can just, by how you are day to day with people that are around you, they're going to want to do the things that you do because they want to achieve and be the way you are on the job.
That sense of just normalizing the behavior that we want and demonstrating the behavior that we want is the way that we make cultural change. And I think that's right in terms of the influencers, again, rolling eyes here, but thinking about like when we're thinking kind of strategically, how do we do this work and create change and roll out a new way of addressing mental health and wellness? For me, that's why it was so important to let's bring together this group of people who already have leadership roles that are in each of the stations that people look to for training, for advice, and let's make sure that they think this is good and that it's what they need and that they're going to use it. If they're not going to use it, no one else is going to use it. So the biggest change happens when the captains and the lieutenants go out and say to everyone, hey, have you done your screening? Hey, it's been a shitty call. Do you want Amanda to reach out to you? Why don't you reach out to Amanda or another therapist for some support here? That's, showing people a way that has helped for them and giving them permission and inspiration to follow and find their own path.
We started talking about relationships. It got me thinking now about the relationship between maybe these people of influence within departments and their administration and the general perception of the members. And if there's a poor relationship there, if there's friction, resentment, that can get in the way. And a lot of people might think, well, I'm not going to do anything to make this place any better because that just makes life easier for you. And it kind of misses the point of it doesn't matter if that's one of the effects of you showing up and trying to make the place better. The real goal is to benefit the people that are beside you. So even if you don't want to do it for your department, quote unquote, then you can do it for yourself and for the people around you. That just makes the day-to-day operations and just the general vibe and the culture more beneficial. People will want to come in. They'll want to be around each other. They're going to enjoy their work more. It's not about ignoring the frustrations that poor relationship with labor and management can have, but it's about maybe not making it the focus of the decisions you make.
When we think about what's the kind of hardest parts of this job, as you'll know so well, it's not the stuff that you see or the stuff that you do. It's often the personalities and the politics. And for me, one of the biggest themes that has such an impact is the sense of sanctuary trauma, where we kind of expect that our administration, our senior leadership is going to show up for us and support us. And there's a sense of kind of family that should be looking out for us. They should be setting a good example. And when that breaks down, when that doesn't happen, it causes such huge injury. It means that people don't want to show up to work. It means they don't want to go to the calls. It means they're not communicating well with their teams. It means that they're really stressed. They're really anxious about how they're going to move forward. They feel like they can't show up. They can't be a human. They feel like they just need to be a robot, do their job and get out of there. And that's what happens when those relationships break down, when leadership or the personalities on the floor, if it's not dealt with well, that people really disconnect. And I think that's really dangerous as helping professionals if we're disconnecting from each other. In fire, we really rely on each other to run these calls. If we can't communicate or those relationships are breaking down, it's not a healthy work environment for those of us doing the work. And it's definitely not going to be healthy for the public that we're serving either. So I think that sense of leadership, thinking about how they show up, that kind of sense of personal leadership, not only what are the policies and procedures, but how are they leading? What's the kind of tone that they are setting, and how do they regulate that tone, make sure that it is a good vibe for people to experience going in to their workplace. It's so important. It does so much damage when it's not good.
You mentioned you find with first responders is binary thinking and about shifting that to something more nuanced, which again is ironic because the majority of people will say the job's not black and white, it's gray. So they'll say that in one reference to something, and then when they come to something like this, they're like, no, it's binary. We don't often think it all the way through and transfer one thought across other views. You talked about personal accountability. So binary thinking would be, which I love to do, and then try and find the middle. Is this no one's coming to save you? You could decide no one's coming to save you. It's all on you to do whatever you need to do. There is some value to that. There also is the expectation that an administration employer is responsible for every single thing about me. Do you find part of your work is trying to get people to think more nuanced and bring some personal accountability, even at their lowest moment, to take some personal accountability and then empower them to get better, but also lean into these supports that exist, even if they're not all the ones they think they should have?
This is my favorite, easiest part of my job, right? Is helping people kind of to understand what are some of these kind of thought patterns, what are the key messages that they're telling themselves about themselves in a certain situation or about the options that they have. For me, it's kind of like always an easy win when I can say like, okay, you're thinking this or that. What about the middle ground? Sometimes we'll draw it out on a piece of paper, like, what is this? What is that? Where's the middle? It's an easy win for me as a therapist, but these thought traps are powerful. I certainly have them. I'm very much like my way or the highway, and I get it as well in my own life. And when it comes to feeling like something has been done to us, like the sense of injury from our workplace, from our employers, it can be very tricky to balance it's all my fault versus it's all their fault, rather than maybe a kind of more nuanced approach is understanding the system's a bit fucked up and there's a lot of pressure on me in my life, so I'm not showing up in the best way possible. Or I feel like everyone's really focusing on this when actually it's just me that this is a big deal for. So where's the kind of middle ground and how do we get ourselves out of it? Understanding like, where do we actually have some options? Where do we have some control? Or where do we need to just practice some acceptance of the situation is what it is, once we kind of unpick ourselves from the all or nothing thinking. It is what it is, and I'm allowed to have my response to it. I can be angry, I can be frustrated, I can be sad and resentful. And what am I going to do with those feelings? So I think there's knowing that our brain likes to go to all or nothing thinking is always a quick win for me. And when people see that pattern, it can be a quick win for them as well. They can start to think about like, okay, what is the balanced place I can come to? And then what kind of power and what sense of responsibility and personal leadership can I take in this situation where I don't feel so stuck on either end?
Do you find there are common themes that people are coming to you with? Is it addiction, substance abuse? Is it family relationships, work?
The presenting issue, it's usually I had a bad call. And then underlying issue is usually family, concerns about health, issues around relationships within the department, relationship with peers, a lot of issues around health stuff and fears around how that's going to impact them or their families and their job. The kind of hot topics are usually sleep, money, how they're coping. So usually substance use, alcohol use is a big one here. Presenting issues usually like bad call, and then we get into the underlying stuff. I think the thing that often comes up is people aren't aware of some of the messages they had from their earlier years or some of the examples that they were given from their own families of origins or some things that may have happened to them through their life. And they don't make the connection between that stuff and maybe some of the negative beliefs that they might be holding about themselves in those situations, or some of their kind of default responses that get kicked off and how that can show up for them when they're on a call or after a call when they're kind of processing, making sense of how they showed up in a call. But that for me is always really interesting to understand like what's presenting and then understand a bit about their history and then supporting people to start to see like where the linkage is and how can we helpfully make sense of it so that I know what my kind of key themes are and I know how to support myself to recognize and accept what's coming up for me, as well as take care of myself while I'm dealing with some of the key themes that come up for me.
We touched on social media there for a moment. How much is the breadth of information now that's available for people in the mental health sphere a hindrance or a help? And do you have people coming in with fears and concerns or self-diagnosing? Or is it beneficial now that when you speak to them, you can recommend resources? Is filtering the best thing that we can do for them as opposed to, just leaving them to their own devices and going down a YouTube rabbit hole that may not be beneficial?
I'm laughing over here as you talk about self-diagnosis and the rabbit hole. Scott, I imagine that I think we've all had some experiences with YouTube in particular, rabbit holes. I'll have clients saying, I went down the rabbit hole last night. I think anything that raises awareness is helpful PR. It's helpful because it's getting information out there. And at the same time, as you're saying, we're practicing not going to all or nothing thinking here. It can also be not helpful if we're watching, a 20-second clip or however long it is that we manage to pay attention to, where we might be getting oh, this is a thing you need to do, but it's not talking about our situation. It's not understanding the nuances of who we are and what's happening for us. It's helpful in that it's raising awareness and it can support us to ask questions. It can be hurtful in that it not spoke to us and our situation. And if somebody is already anxious and concerned about some of the things that they're experiencing, we might find some self-diagnosis rabbit hole tendencies, which is going to raise anxiety and make them feel even shittier about their situation. As a professional, I'm so grateful for the resources that are out there because social media is not my jam. It is not how I want to spend my time, unfortunately. And I'm so grateful that others do and that I can kind of collect these resources and say hey, this is a good one. This is reliable. It's evidence-based. The person's talking sense and I don't find them too annoying. So you might actually listen to it. So I think that's an important job that I have in terms of doing some of the filtering and sharing useful information and useful, reliable resources for people. There's a danger in there being so much available that we end up zoning it out or tuning it out, and we're not accessing the resources or the tools or the information that is actually going to be useful, that we'll actually take in and do something with.
It's common to hear people say, I have ADHD. They haven't been diagnosed. They just I'm ADHD, I'm OCD, I'm bipolar. It can be harmful because people that actually struggle with it and you don't, and you're just sort of using it in this colloquial way. Is it required often for people to actually get assessments done and find out if these are actual issues that they're dealing with and then how to approach them? And again, not necessarily that medication is going to be part of that, but it may be. But does it give people some solace to find out, okay, I'm actually dealing with this or I'm actually not dealing with this and here's what is in front of me?
It totally depends. And I'm a social worker, so I'm going to give you a very social work answer rather than what you might get from a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But of course, clients will say, I think I have ADHD, or some people will come and they're curious about it and say, especially with social media, people are doing more kind of self-identification or self-diagnosis, and they'll be curious about that. And I'll spend a whole session talking to them about what would it mean to you to get a diagnosis? What would you actually want to do with that? What difference would it make to you? You're an adult now, you're in your career. What is it that you want from a diagnosis? There's a real kind of wanting to medicalize their symptoms so that they can get appropriate treatment and pathways. But as an adult with ADHD, for example, if you're surviving and you have skills that you've figured out to survive your day-to-day life and thrive in your role, then the kind of recommendations, you can access all of that. You can access all of the tools and tips about how to support you to focus your attention. So is a diagnosis going to be helpful? Do they want that to just, again, have that sense of validation, have it on their medical record? What do they kind of expect from a diagnosis? Some people think if I get a diagnosis, then I'm going to get treatment and then it's going to cure this problem. When some of these issues around how our mind operates, it's not going to change how our brain's going to function. We have to think about how we are going to adapt to our environments. In the case of medication, it can be really helpful. And some people don't want to take medication. So again, my role as a therapist with a social work background, I really like to understand where people's values lie, what's within the limits, what's off limits for them, and what it would mean for them to get a diagnosis and what the treatment options would look like for them. And if they need, often you don't need a diagnosis to access a treatment option. So just helping people really flesh that out and understand what it is that they want out of understanding symptoms and treatment.
Another common theme that I hear often is about healing. And we all do if we're struggling with something and it's been super impactful. We want to obviously see it as harmful, it's hurtful, and we need to heal psychologically from that. How are you using that or hearing that term being used? How beneficial is it? What does it mean to you? Is it better to realize that maybe the hardwired reactions that you have are not going to change? That's not going to be healing where I don't react to that thing anymore. It's more so recognizing when the reaction happens and then being able to choose a different path post-reaction. Is that more accurate?
So I think the term healing is potentially dangerous, is my kind of initial reaction to that. I think about people, especially in my community, there's a lot of people with backgrounds in faith or come from religious families, and healing can have a really specific context, which for some people is helpful and other people is not so helpful. So that's my kind of initial reaction. For me, I want to understand what's the individual's context and what does healing mean to them. For so many people, that sense of recovery or healing or feeling better to them means, can you please delete this memory from my brain or my response? I just want it to stop. I want it to go out of my brain. Take it out of my brain. I never want to think about this again. Where for me, recovering or growth is really about making our own sense of what happened to us and finding a place in our life story where that can fit, where we don't have to like it. We don't have to think about it all the time, but we have an understanding and acceptance of, yeah, that shit happened. It is there, and this is where it lives in my life history, and understanding what that means to us. So it might mean that our reaction, once we've developed that understanding and maybe done some processing work, I'm a trauma therapist, so I focus on processing the trauma and getting to that place of understanding that our reactions aren't as big, but we're still aware that it's, something bumps up against that thing. We're going to have a little pain point there maybe, but that it doesn't have to take over our whole day or our whole life, that we can appreciate why we've had that response and kind of look back of, oh, wait, where does that fit in my story? What does that mean to me again? Why am I having that response? Oh, yeah, I know those things now. It's not surprising me. It's not unexpected. And we can give ourselves a little bit of time to tune into that rather than just ignore it and move on. So for me, healing or recovery or feeling better is about some acceptance about what happened to us, around developing our own narrative and understanding and having a way of dealing with that and taking care of ourselves when those parts get activated.
How important is it for people to understand the difference between processing a difficult call or an event that occurred in their life and is now done? And perhaps the therapy and the support that they have can help ease that. And again, not heal them, but put it in a place where they can get back to where it's not impacting their life day to day, versus using therapy and support in a long-term fashion as symptom relief for chronic issues or practical problems that are not going to abate within a month, a year, 2 years, 6 years, 10 years. And how beneficial is therapy to be seen in that regard as helping you survive?
I love this question, Scott, because what I usually get is people coming to me for the first part. I had a difficult call, or this thing happened to me and it keeps coming up and I can't stop thinking about it. I thought I blocked it out, but now it's coming up. So that first presenting part versus the long-term personal growth and development. And as a professional, I feel a real sense of responsibility that I'm doing personally both. That if I have something difficult come up for me in my life, that I'm accessing support to deal with that as a specific contained issue. And that I also have ongoing support for me to be the best human I can be with all of the shit that I've had or that I'm dealing with or doing the best with. So as a therapist, as a mom, as a wife, as a human, I do my own therapy so that I know very well what my clients have to deal with when I show up to my therapist every month and hold myself accountable for continuing to be curious about what my pain points are, how they're showing up in my daily life, how am I responding to them, how might it be impacting my work, my family, and for how I'm showing up, as well as having support when, say, I have some heavy trauma exposure from the work that I do, and making sure that I have time to also do that work. So for my own survival, I know I have to do both. Otherwise, I can't be a good therapist. I can't be a good wife. I can't be a good mom. So I think it's really important that one of the challenges in terms of funding and support in departments is that there tends to be funding and promotion around go and get support after that difficult stuff, rather than this is a lifestyle thing. This is a way that we take care of ourselves. This is part of our life's work. Therapy is not for everybody, but for those of us who know what it's like to have a good fit and to have someone sit with us and support us to have really meaningful conversations, to have that time where we're doing that, we know how meaningful that can be. And it's a bit of a lost opportunity if we're not also, in terms of our roles as leaders in our organizations, if we're not also talking about that part, that actually this can be a really great thing that gets us through life when we have somebody to go to that's supportive. With my clients, I'll say, you might come to me and have some stuff come up and we'll work through that. And then that might be enough for you. You might come to me and you might want to meet with me forever until I'm done. Like, both are okay. Like, whatever you need, I'm here, but both are really valuable. And some clients who I'm doing more long-term work, they'll have some fear like, oh, but I don't have something urgent, a catastrophic crisis. Maybe I shouldn't be taking your time. Maybe someone else has something more important and urgent to come to you for. It's a really common conversation that I have with clients who are kind of more on this second end where they've simmered down the crisis, but there's still stuff that they would find value in unpacking. And we have that conversation about what's your sense of meaning and purpose and how you make your way through life. And is that helpful for you? And people, of course, say, yeah, it is. It's nice to not do this alone. It's also nice to have a protected space where it's just for us in our day-to-day life. So we have to consider others. In therapy, we just have to consider ourselves. And that's a real gift that we can give ourselves.
We could probably benefit in the first responder community from realizing that we can't stop the fire service or the police service or the EMS and to stop all calls, deal with whatever issues, tangible or intangible, and then start back up again. We're doing this in real time and things get layered on. So there really is that aspect to your own mental health. You don't come in and stop your life and deal with all the problems that you have and then start fresh and then move on. And maybe this is what this ongoing mentality or understanding is. I've said to my counselor a number of times, do normal people take this long? And then it came to this realization of like, oh, things are just, they're layered, they're overlapping, they're affecting each other. It's complex. So this is where the benefit of having somebody there that you trust over a long period of time and just not putting a time constraint on yourself.
That's so valuable, that sense of in the day-to-day, we don't have time to hit pause and say, oh, wait, this felt uncomfortable for me, or, oh, I think I may have had a reaction. There's not that opportunity. But when you have made a commitment on a regular basis, whatever that means to you, whatever's helpful for you, sit with somebody and show up and hold yourself accountable for doing a bit of a check-in around what's coming up for me, what am I dealing with, what am I holding back, what am I avoiding, and having a conversation and digging deeply into that, then you're really creating space for some growth and development. I know when I'm avoiding or I'm canceling appointments or I'm deciding not to talk about stuff with my partner or with my therapist, then, I'm really digging myself into a hole and I'm not growing. I'm really limiting myself and I'm going to get myself in a bad spot. So I think with all of the layers of being a human, and then add on to that the layers of dealing with the trauma exposure and the questions that can raise about what it means to be human, that having some time to have some meaningful conversations and just to hit pause, to be able to tune into yourself and check in on how you're doing and what's coming up for you. I think it's a part of survival, a really important part of survival. We want people to thrive, to feel good about the work they're doing, and to be really supported.
You've mentioned accountability a few times, and it can very much have a negative connotation that I'm going to hold you accountable. Is it more beneficial to see it as awareness, acceptance, acknowledgement, and then being empowered, even at your lowest point, to own some part of your story and your growth, and then you as a therapist scaffolding them as they work through it?
So this kind of accountability piece is, totally my stuff. I know I'm hard on myself and accountability is really meaningful for me. I feel like I have a big responsibility to practice what I preach. And those of us that are in leadership positions in our communities, whether it's leadership in the organization or being a first responder, I think there's such a responsibility here. So I'm biased and I'm aware that accountability can be a harsh word or a harsh perspective, and I hold pretty strongly to it. So that's my all or nothing thinking coming up. I'm very attached to that. You're reframing this in a helpful way by talking about awareness, acceptance, acknowledgement around what we need, what our challenges are, and taking some opportunities to reflect on how that's showing up for us, and using a tool like therapy to be empowered by our own experiences and use them as opportunities for growth. So I think that's a beautiful way of reframing it, Scott. And I would kind of say tomato, tomato, do it all. Do both. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way to reframe it.
Are personal growth breaks valuable in people's journey, that they don't need to be improving every minute of every day and taking a breath and just being who you are for that hour, for that day, for that week, and not seeing it as a lapse or a waste of time or a hindrance to growth or an onset of complacency?
This is huge. The helping professionals that I work with, in particular, myself included here, there's a real pressure, drawing on the accountability comment earlier. There's this real pressure to be improving, to being doing something valuable with our time, to making every workout, making every moment count, to read more, learn more, do more. Again, the sense of like, we have to be doing, we have to be solving this problem. We need to be getting better. We need to be performing better. There's so many of my clients are type A personalities. I don't know why I draw them to me, but I do. And I think this is a real mantra, this be more, do more. And so much of the work I've had to do myself and that I support clients to examine is, can we just accept that we're good enough, that we do enough? And so many people experience a lot of pain when they aren't at full capacity and where they physically can't do what they would usually do. I get sick or I miss a workout, or God forbid, if I ever had to cancel a day with clients, that I can't imagine having to do that. It would be really difficult for me. And at the same time, if we're sick and we need to rest and recover, then that's important too. That's how we sustain ourselves. There's so much pressure in the first responder world to continue to grow and improve that we can lose those moments of just acceptance and being able to celebrate who we are, even if we're having a hard time in that moment. I think of a client who I'm working with right now who's going through a really, really challenging time and is beating themselves up for watching endless YouTube videos of something like irrelevant to their life, and is saying like, I should be answering all those emails. I should be taking this time that I'm off to work out, to go see friends, to doing research about what the best next steps are for me in this situation. Yet all I'm doing is watching YouTube videos and sleeping. Yeah, of course it's what you're doing. Like, your body needs this time to rest and recover, given all that you've been doing. We've been going too far to the doing end. Our system's going to regulate us and take us out of commission for a little while. And that's a really valuable, important part of our journey to being able to sustain ourselves. So I think there's a real risk that we judge ourselves when we're not doing, or we have an expectation that we're always doing, rather than seeing that sense of just being or taking time off or lowering the temperature a little bit, seeing that as just as valuable and a really important part of our ability to continue to perform, whatever that looks like in our life.
You know, the breathers can be part of your consistency. I guess it's a problem if you take a breather for 5, 6, 10 years. That's not a breather.
Right, exactly. And that was the exact conversation. If you were doing this all day, every day for 6 months, like, I'm concerned about, 6 hours of YouTube of something completely ridiculous that has nothing to do with your life. However, if you're spending a couple of weeks as you're going through a shitty time watching YouTube and only doing the basic survival stuff, yeah, you're in a shitty time. That's what we do to get through shitty times.
Touching back to give some people some actionable things here before we close off. Speaking about funding, you mentioned peer support teams. If they're not able to get a large amount of funding, you could very much go to your administration and say, we need funding, we need funding, we need funding. And then it's like, for what? I hadn't really thought about for what. So what are the high ROI things that peer support teams, system teams, whatever label they want to give themselves, could put their funding into and their time into to benefit their department?
I think the most important thing that can be done that's free is understanding what the local and national resources are that are freely available, and also developing works with our local providers so that we know what's available and we can give people good information and resources, similar to what we're talking about with the social media stuff. The role of the CISM teams and peer supporters is really to make those connections. I think that has such good value. There's a lot of resources out there that are freely available that provide a little first step for people, particularly if funding's not available for more long-term development and support therapeutic work. I think that's really important. And at the same time, in the work that I've done with volunteer departments, I'm really interested and curious. And the chief here that I work really closely with would say we actually need to prioritize the funding. We need to make mental health support available for our firefighters. We have a responsibility here as part of health and safety, and we need to find a way. I was talking with another firefighter who sells equipment, and they were asking about what's the costing for my services for a department. And I was saying, I'm a bit nervous about like whether they can fund it or not. And he was laughing. He's like, they all spent this much money on like new boots that they didn't even need. Don't be shy about giving them the price for a service that should be mandatory. So I'm really interested to see how people can get creative and find the resources. I think it's so important that volunteer departments in particular, that they start to just establish precedents through establishing a budget line around mental health, whatever that looks like as a starting point. So it means it's there. The way that some of the departments that I'm working with are finding money is looking at available funding streams, looking at grants that are available, looking at what income revenue they can bring in through things like fire permits, or when there is an accident and they have to charge for it, they bring that into create the mental health budget. So people are getting creative, and this really needs to be a priority. It's a shame that there's not the provincial funding available for volunteer departments to access these kind of direct support.
I think if we asked peer support teams or system teams to describe what they would want in counselors for their people, they would probably want somebody that has a breadth of awareness of different therapies. You talked about this in the very beginning with your training, that understands different psychotherapists, over time and their approaches. And so they would be able to bring a nuanced or complex or pieces of things together to help somebody on their specific journey. Yet a lot of teams want to marry themselves to an approach. SISM's one of them, because it's the biggest fish in the pond still. Is there more value to a peer support team taking a wide variety of training? Because there's a lot of them and they're kind of all doing the same thing, but there are nuances between them. And then taking that breadth of awareness and education and then just approaching people in a genuine, authentic way as a human being and not trying to push people through the eye of a needle.
For me as a practitioner, I know that I need to have a big toolbox full of different tools, because not one client that comes to me is going to want one particular approach or need one particular approach. It's not, one size fits all. So I know that I need to have, for example, some cognitive behavioral therapy stuff. I need to have a person-centered approach. I know that I need my EMDR, my trauma processing stuff, some parts work mixed in there. Like, it's going to depend on who's there, what the day is, what issues presenting, what mood they're in, if they want to talk, if they just want to do some processing. So I think similarly, we have to think about peer support teams or SISM teams. We want them to be well-resourced. We want them to feel really grounded in themselves so they can do that work of showing up, as we've talked about, as we would want to with the public. We would want our peer support and SISM teams to be able to show up and really be present in the humanness of it all and make a connection with the person that they're supporting. I think there is, as you're kind of alluding to here, there's a risk if we say, like, this is the program that we're using, you do these steps, and that's the intervention, that we're then kind of like plugging into a bit of robot mode, which misses the whole kind of human component. We know that the most important element of a helping relationship is the relationship, is that we feel that there's a connection. We feel we like this person. We feel like they understand us. We feel like we would actually chat with them. If we're so focused on, okay, what's step A, B, C, and this is what I need to tell the person or what I need to get them to do, without being centered in ourselves and being able to be engaged and connected and empathetic with the person, then it's not going to be a good use of time. So I think having a different range of approaches and having different training, it's like filling up your toolbox with lots of different stuff. And then as the expert in peer support or SISM, you can decide, okay, what do I have in my toolbox that's going to help me with this situation that's going to be most useful for this person?
How can people reach out to you if they want to connect in the absence of social media?
I have two homes. One of my important homes is the work that I'm doing through Hummingbird Therapy with my colleague Jody Walker and her team. I'm the wellness director there for her first responder programs. And there we're kind of rolling out bigger programs, department-wide programs. One is called Beside the Badge, which is a resource for spouses of first responders. We saw that gap. And Jody Walker, who's the director of Hummingbird Therapy, she was a spouse of a firefighter for 10 years and really experienced firsthand the devastation that trauma can bring to families and wanted to deliver something for her communities. So through Hummingbird Therapy, we have Beside the Badge. We have the wellness program, which is built from the one that I developed here in Wainfleet and have shared locally. It's available across Ontario that provides the post-critical incident screenings, tools, resources, therapy. And there's also a program there for retired first responders, supporting emotional well-being after retirement, which we know those transition points are really important. So Hummingbird Therapy, I'm the wellness director there, and I manage their programs for departments for first responders. Personally, in my own practice, you can reach me through amandaharry.com, the website there, and my email's there. It's info@amandaharry.com. So if anyone has any questions about their own therapy journeys or wants to connect for that or wants recommendations for other therapists to work with, I'm really happy to offer that through there. Or if there's peer support teams or departments that want to get in touch to talk about wellness program development, then you can connect with me through there as well.
I appreciate your insight today.
Thanks so much, Scott. This has been great. And I'm appreciating you taking your time, showing up, being human, and supporting other people to share their journeys as well.